What's up, guys? It's Gary with Fresh from the Farm Fungi. The following recording is a podcast from Micropreneurs Podcast. It's a new podcast featuring different entrepreneurs in the mycology world. If you're interested in hearing more podcasts, they are available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Check out our Etsy. We just loaded up some fresh cordyceps or freshly preserved cordyceps. And then we've also got our hericiums back up on Etsy. So this is about an hour long recording, and it kind of covers my background and some things that I'm really passionate about moving forward in the mycology world. I hope you guys enjoy this special edition Fungi Friday with at Micropreneurs. Check out his Instagram. He's got some really cool graphics, and there's supposed to be a bunch of guests that he's got lined up. So I'm looking forward to listening to those in the future, as well as participating in this podcast. All right, give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this, and subscribe if you're looking forward to more mycology videos like these. Much love.
Hey, what's up, Gary? How's it going, man? Can you hear me?
Yep, you're coming in clear. How about me?
Fantastic. Super cool, man. Well, welcome. Nice to see you, dude. I'm Dennis.
I'm Gary. Nice to meet you.
Likewise. I'll just give you a quick 2-minute primer on what we usually do. I will introduce you and we'll jump right into it. It's mostly cultivation questions. I did some research on your website, on YouTube videos and whatnot. And I'll probably re-record my part since I'm at a co-working space. I don't have my microphone, but to be said, if there's a question you fumble on or you want to revise, just make a note and I can change it in the edit. Otherwise, I'll leave your responses unedited, if that sounds good.
Yeah, that's cool with me. I usually just do one take everything. So
I
makes
love
it easy.
Well, I'm super excited, man. I hope you enjoy the following discourse that we have, because I really enjoyed going through. I didn't have a ton of time to prepare for this, but I feel like we have some good talking points that we can start. And again, this is just like a frame of reference that I have. Feel free to go completely off script, and there's no script. It's just to help kind of frame it and give it a narrative, cohesive flow.
Yeah, that works for me.
Cool, man. And what is your last name so I can introduce you?
It's Hefferle. That's Heferle. Yep.
Cool. Hefferle. All right, let's get going, man. So I always have the same introduction. So I'll just do that and we'll jump right into it. Okay. Let's go for it. Cool. Okay. Que pasa Mufasa. Welcome, Gary Hefferle from Fresh from the Farm Fungi. What's up, Gary?
Hey, greetings from Denver.
Cool, man. So I saw that you just recently got back from the NOCO Hemp Expo in Colorado, where you had a Fresh from the Fungi farm booth, Fresh from the Farm Fungi booth. Can you tell us a little bit about the expo and some of the highlights from the experience?
Yeah. So actually, my friend Zach was running the booth with me from Mushroom Cult, and he was the one who recommended reaching out to you. So it was a really cool event in Denver. It was probably, the largest event that we attended since the whole COVID thing happened. So it was a little overwhelming at first. There's a lot of people, a lot of vendors, but it was a great place to do some networking. One of my main goals of going there was to close the end on the hemp industry, to close the loop. So one of the main, problems that I see as a consumer in, the hemp world is that a lot of their waste product is just thrown out and, it goes right into the landfill. And as a mushroom cultivator, I see that as, just a reserves, a gold mine of substrate. So one of my missions there was just, to link up some of these larger hemp farms with one of the people who I work with, which is Mushroom Media. Like the owner Seth there, he distributes pellets all over the country. So I thought it would be cool to link up one of these hemp farms with this guy who produces pellets, and they could produce hemp pellets, and then I could grow my mushrooms on them. So that was, one of my main missions. But throughout the course of the weekend, I met so many cool vendors, so many, people that are interested in mushrooms. And it really made me appreciate, the growing industry that we're a part of and just all the potential that there is to, continue bringing mushrooms to the community. So that was kind of, the highlight of my weekend. And it was just talking for like 48 hours straight, like my throat hurt after, but I got to meet a lot of really cool people, and I hope that the mushroom and hemp relationship continues after that. I'm going to be doing some test runs. I actually just started this week spawning some different hemp products. So there's a couple companies that they had these huge bales of hemp that they didn't really know what to do with. So at the very end, Zach and we snatched up some of those hemp bales, and now we're trying to grow mushrooms on it.
Wow, that's a lot happened in a very compact time frame, it sounds like. And that's actually exactly what I was going to ask you next, because I saw on your live stream, you closed with some remarks saying that you foresee a lot of opportunity for the hemp industry and mushroom cultivators and the mycology industry to work together. And no doubt, as we close the loop on so many other different processes related to cultivation, I personally have been interested in growing mushrooms in coffee grounds, right? And coffee restaurants will actually pay you to get rid of their grounds for them. And that's perfect substrate for oyster mushrooms. So I'd never actually considered hemp, but that's an awesome thing about talking to more people like you, start to figuring out more ideas about how we can do that. So on this podcast, we've been covering a lot of ground in a very short amount of time, much in the same spirit as mushroom innovation and disruption across industries is happening. And we've touched extensively on a lot of different topics, including the renaissance of psychedelic therapy and medicine. We've touched on mushrooms as an antidote to food inequity and achieving healthy food security in marginalized communities, mycofiltration, a little bit about materials. I'm curious if there's anything off the top of your head that you have seen recently or you saw at the convention of somebody working with mushrooms in a really innovative way, maybe you hadn't considered before.
Yeah. So, I've being part of this industry, there's a million directions you can go. And that's one of the challenges as a cultivator, to just stay focused, which I kind of stray away from just cultivating a lot, but I think it's fun. But one of the coolest things that I saw at the expo was there was a woman that she was producing like CBD capsules, but her material that she packaged it in was made out of mushroom mycelium. So that was the first time in real life when I saw, wow, this person had a product. It was like a health related product, and the packaging itself was made out of mushrooms. And I think there's so much potential to expand on that. I don't know like the cost that went into producing that product, but I've heard it talked about, for years and years now, and then actually seeing it in person, was really cool. And I would say like that was the highlight, one of the highlights. There's also, a lot of these products that they just want to blend the mushroom as like a nutraceutical. And being, at a hemp expo, there was a lot of CBD products, a lot of, just therapeutic products that were out there. And a lot of people were interested in blending, the mushrooms into those just for the health benefits that a lot of these just regular mushroom, I would say like a nutraceutical. So, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity for partnerships to be made, and, both industries are expanding rapidly. And one of the coolest things about the innovation in the hemp industry is that it kind of started a little bit before the mushrooms. So all of the prices of these like pieces of equipment, like extraction machines, even just a lot of the cultivation equipment has come down a lot. So people like me who, I'm just running this business, but it's me and my wife, and we don't have that much capital or resources, but with the price of all those goods coming down, it allows us to innovate a lot more rapidly than maybe 20 or 30 years ago, when if you wanted to, buy an extraction machine, it would have been $50,000, and now you can get used ones for significantly cheaper. So I see like the potential of where things are going and the hemp industry has brought the price of those goods down, and it allowed, the opportunities for partnerships. And like I said early on, is I think the biggest, thing that could come out of it is getting like healthy substrates to grow mushrooms, and that's ultimately going to help out all the mushroom farmers out there. So I think that overall, it's really promising, and it was a good experience. And as far as innovation goes, it's just like mind blowing how many ideas are coming out of this realm.
Dude, it's awesome. And it is accelerating quickly as more and more people are starting to recognize that. And having a conversation with your business partner, Zach, he mentioned how one of his favorite things is to see people bring different backgrounds into mycology and into cultivation. To have someone who, like myself, I have a background in media production, and all of a sudden, I've been interested in mushrooms for years, but now there's so much to cover, and there finally is like an audience for it. And it's even going mainstream, right? Where you're starting to see coverage of different innovations in mushroom technology in like BBC and even on Fox News and ESPN. It's crazy. No one could have predicted this a few years ago. So I wanted to share a story. I just uploaded moments ago, episode 7 of our podcast, and it's with a woman in Uganda named Josephine Nakakandi, who's the executive director of Eco Agric Uganda. And speaking of different wastes as substrate, she teaches women in Uganda how to cultivate oyster mushrooms to improve their livelihood, which is virtually non-existent. Many of the women live on less than $1 a day. And what's amazing to me is they have all of the substrate already there, because what they do have available typically is corn. So they can use the corn husks as a substrate, and a number of other different agricultural waste products that in turn, without very much water and very many, unaccounted for resources, all of a sudden they're able to grow abundant protein and not only consume it for their villages, but increase their daily gainful employment to $4 to $6 a day or more. And it's like, how many more times can we extrapolate that and spread that to other developing nations, be it Pakistan or in Mexico, where I'm very passionate about the people. So I think there's so much room, not only, for partnership with the hemp industry, but for starting to recognize these existing waste products are the perfect substrate for growing oyster mushrooms or other types of mushrooms. So I saw on your website that you offer certified wild foraged mushrooms, including chanterelle, which is a personal favorite of mine. Although actually all of the following are favorites of mine. Also lobster mushrooms, which I've found in abundance here in Mexico in the rainy season. And you've got morel and porcini. And you have a quote that resonated with me, or I found it interesting, that says, "We don't cultivate these ... yet," end quote. Are you working on cultivating some of these wild mushrooms, which to my understanding are extremely difficult because they require certain ecosystems of various trees and root networks and soil types? Is that something you're finding a hack around?
Yeah. So a big part of my YouTube channel right now is cultivating some of these, fringe mushrooms, I like to say. So starting out, we can kind of break it down. The Morchella species, the morel mushrooms, I was really inspired by Trad Cotter. He gave a presentation at the Telluride Mushroom Festival a couple of years back, and he showed, as kind of like a teaser, some snapshots of these morel farms in China. And that was, I think it was 2018. So they had just started doing this. And I know that there's a gentleman in Iowa, Blues Best Mushrooms, and they are commercially cultivating the morel mushrooms. So they've been successful for a couple years now, which is, a lot of people just considered it impossible or very unsustainable. So I'm working on, just a methodology, or, my expertise might be just in finding and breeding the right species. So, morel mushrooms as an ascomycete, they're very polymorphic in nature. So they're not like a saprobe, like an oyster mushroom, where they're only eating the decaying wood. But I believe that, they bounce around from a saprophytic behavior to ectomycorrhizal behavior with the grass roots, and they have a special life cycle they have a special part of their life cycle that a lot of the saprobes don't have, being an ascomycete, and they produce conidia, which is like a intermediate stage between a fruiting body and the expanding mycelium. So there's, a few key points when you're cultivating morel mushrooms, and one of them is the conidia production. The other interesting factor is that they don't like to be spawned heavily, like let's say a King Stropharia. They like a central point, which the Blues Best, they sell kits which kind of emulate this, but I'm just kind of working on scaling it up to the climate of Colorado, which is super dry. But essentially you take the spawn, you keep it inside of a bag, and then you poke holes in the bag so that the mycelium can go out and explore. And that way it has like the centralized packets of nutrients. And then once it hits like a perimeter around that bag, it will tend to fruit. So, that is, I would say it's in the past 5 or 6 years that they figured that out. So I don't want to take credit for that, but I'm just expanding on it and, just trying to broadcast that so that, like how Zach said, all these other people can put their minds behind it and improve that process, because I love morel mushrooms. And if everyone's growing them, that's going to be great for the world. So moving on from morel mushrooms, I'm also working on porcini, which there's a couple papers that are coming out of France. If you look back on my YouTube videos, they incorporate this really cool plant. I actually have one right behind me. It's called, it's a rock rose plant, and it's called a Cistus ladanifer. So these plants are super cool because they pop up after forest fires. So they're one of, the fastest organisms to kind of refurbish a forest. And one of the neat features because of that is that they can harbor tons and tons of different microorganisms in their roots, because I think of it as like, an insurance policy for the forest. So it's harboring all these different various fungi, and that allows it to be more ectomycorrhizal than, the traditional hemlock trees or other conifers that you would see porcinis grow. So I don't know if it would work with chanterelle, and it's very fringe as far as the success goes right now. But I think the power and the key is in a plant like this that has these really unique features that allow for fungi to adapt to the plant and stressed environments. And one of the projects that I just did was trying to grow this in tandem with porcini inside of a tote. But I figured out that they like the lower humidity that is, generally after a forest fire or just being in nature in general. So, they didn't withstand some of the normal molds like botrytis, or I think it was, probably a powdery mildew or something that ended up killing this. But I'm going to be expanding that into raised beds. And then also I have a piece of my property along a fence that I'm going to try to expand it even farther just to scale up, the experiment. But the coolest thing about, doing these kind of videos on YouTube and having a YouTube channel is the community that it creates. So after I released that video, I got this email from some guy in Germany, and he sent me all these photos of like his porcini experiment. And he had like little baby pins, and one of his pots actually had a porcini mushroom. So to me, that was very exciting. I got a response from someone. The translation wasn't that good, but basically he told me that my pot wasn't deep enough. So that's something that I'm going to consider, with the next round. But that being said, I think that if it can grow in nature, you can replicate it in the lab. There's some really complex relationships that are happening, but the more and more I'm working with these mushrooms, the more I understand the importance of the scale of everything. So in a healthy forest, there's not going to be this tiny little microclimate of, perfect CO2 and perfect humidity. And maybe the swings are, consistent, but to a person like me, like I wouldn't even notice that. So I think that, the more and more I work with them, the more I appreciate the healthy forest that they come from. And the more that I feel like an earning to protect those regions, just in case we can't figure it out before it's too late. But that's kind of, the direction that I'm going now is I'm just making experiments, filming them, and letting the world see what's happening so that they can provide their input, and then we can move the needle a little bit farther. And I think that it's possible to cultivate porcini, probably chanterelle too. It's just going to take time and effort, and there's not much funding in the mycology world, but just by filming it and shooting it out into the world, I think that you can maximize every single, ounce of energy that's going into these little experiments. So that's kind of, that's kind of the projects that I'm working on, if
Super
that
exciting.
answers your question.
Well, it sure did. Thank you for expanding upon that. And there's this element of citizen science that I find so exciting, especially in regards to mycology. And the podcast that we're doing here has followed a very similar arc where I just put one episode out. I reached out to like a handful of friends that I knew personally. And then all of a sudden I've got Zach and Gary and this woman in Uganda that are jumping on. And, it really happens just one connection at a time, right? It doesn't need to be this like cast a wide net and get everything. It's just like peer-to-peer citizen science, citizen diplomacy, and a decentralized sort of abundance, if you will. And I fully believe in that. And I'm excited about what you're doing. I'm excited about hearing, the hemp industry and mycology working together. And there's really limitless horizons of potential from what I can see. And I suppose many others are starting to embrace that too. When you start to see, speaking of no funding in the world of mycology, it depends where you look. There's, massive companies are starting to get behind some of this tech, and hopefully it doesn't turn into, profit-oriented gremlins who are just, hoarding all of the patents for themselves. But it is spread out, spread the wealth, because I believe there's enough to go around. So one of the products that you offer on the Fresh from the Farm fungi website that's very interesting to me is fresh preserved Cordyceps militaris. And I want to talk about that in a second. But first, are you familiar with Cordyceps sinensis, also known as the caterpillar fungus? And for those who are uninitiated, these are little cordyceps mushrooms literally growing out of caterpillar heads, and they fetch upwards of $10,000 a pound. I believe they're localized primarily in southern China and Tibet. Yet your Cordyceps militaris, which is also quite a rare and exotic mushroom offering, you list them for $75 for a half ounce. So by my math, that's about $2,400 a pound. Is there anything other than tradition and social status that justify the $7,500 price difference between wild harvested Cordyceps sinensis and your freshly preserved Cordyceps militaris?
Yeah, so I am familiar with the Cordyceps sinensis. I've never seen one in real life though, but the beautiful part about Cordyceps militaris is that you can cultivate them. So Cordyceps sinensis, as far as I know, it hasn't been cultivated yet. I'm still a believer that it can happen, but it's a much more sensitive mushroom, and just working with Cordyceps, they're very sensitive and finicky, even in cultivation. So I've been working on this project for about 2 years now. I study, William Padilla Brown a lot, and his colleagues and some of the other breeders out there like Terrestrial Fungi. So they've made huge strides in the Cordyceps cultivation world. So one of the reasons for me personally why I priced my mushrooms where they are is because of the difficulty of cultivation. So, it took a huge project to gather, a small amount of the Cordyceps that I was growing. So that's kind of where the price point came in. But also, there's studies that show that the cultivated Cordyceps have just as much cordycepin, which is the that's like the active molecule in cordyceps, which, I mean, you can go into hours and hours of information about that. I actually did a podcast type interview like this with my friend Tyler from Off Grid Apothecary, and it was an hour long of different studies of cordyceps and how, like, the health benefits of them. But it's really cool that there's this cultivatable version of cordyceps, and then the Cordyceps sinensis, which I believe in the power of cordyceps. And just, I'm lucky because now I can eat them every day. It's not an overwhelming cost for me, but my dream is to bring that price down, as a business owner, and just really dial in my production. But that's kind of a late and up and coming industry as well. So during the course of the 2 years that I've been trying to grow cordyceps, and I would say 90% of my batches were just either tiny little mushrooms, or they got overgrown, or my biggest observation is the temperature aspect. Like, most mushrooms can handle 10 or 12 degrees in temperature fluctuations, but the cordyceps is so sensitive that if you have one day where I bump my thermostat and the temperature goes up 4 degrees, that's going to freeze all those pins and they won't produce. So that's my tip to everyone out there, is like, the cordyceps are very sensitive to temperature. And that's kind of where a lot of the cost goes in, is to just maintaining a super perfect temperature for the environment. But if you can figure out how to reduce those costs, maybe you only do it certain points of the year when they're ideal to cultivate in your area, that could help bring that price down and give everyone the ability to experience this awesome medicine. Like, I just make teas with it probably once or twice a week, and I just feel a really long sustained energy. And I can't even tell you like how many benefits come from cordyceps. I'll just sound like some crazy person, but you can go watch the video with Tyler, and check out William Padilla Brown's book on cultivating cordyceps. And then there's a lot of cool research coming out with that. But yeah, that kind of explains the shocking price. Like, a lot of people are like, whoa, why are these so much money? And honestly, it should be less, but I have to stay in business. So
Totally understand.
yeah.
You've mentioned a few names that I'm a big fan of. Would love to get William Padilla Brown on the podcast, and Trad Cotter. I got to say, Trad Cotter definitely wrote one of the books that changed my life in terms of thinking about the applications and the utility of mushrooms. I've had a couple of mushroom books change my life at various stages, but that's the most recent one, Mycoremediation. And in particular, he wrote about mushroom packaging, and how, I don't know the exact year that book was published. It might've been 2018 or 17, around then, but there were people working in that capacity, but nothing had really been scaled yet. And now you mentioned, you go to the NOCO hemp show, and there's a woman with mushroom packaging. And of course, Ecovative Design is another, I'm a very big fan of Eben Bayer and his business partner Gavin. And that's something I personally would love to see, as more and more people are shopping online, right? There's tons of packages being delivered at any given moment, anywhere in the world. And it just seems like a no-brainer to me that if you have the technology to do this and you get enough people behind it, you'll be able to scale it and be able to make it work. So there's a tremendous amount of innovation and disruption happening, and not a minute too soon either. So I'm curious about your business relationship with Zach from Mushroom Cult, because he wrote me and we had him on the podcast. He'll be in a upcoming episode. How did you meet Zach, and what kind of symbiosis do your two organizations enjoy?
Yeah. So Zach's one of my good friends. We met a few years back. I just gave this random talk about the health benefits of mushrooms. So it was probably 3 years ago now, at the co-op where I sell some of my fresh mushrooms. They have an event center there, and it had an open day. So I'm like, I've always struggled with public speaking, so it was kind of on me to, practice just talking publicly. So, I made this thing. I was super nervous about it, and lo and behold, Zach and his wife are the only two people in the audience. So it made it, very easy for me to give this presentation. And then afterwards, he stuck around for a while. We talked about mushroom cultivation, and there's this old stump behind the store. So I explained, maybe we can drill some holes in this stump and get some mushrooms. And a couple months after that, he had reached out to me. I knew that he was teaching classes, like cultivation classes at the Colorado Free University, which it's kind of like this nonprofit, like classroom setting on campus. And we kind of joined forces at that point because I'm not horribly comfortable with public speaking, and he's a really good speaker. And I kind of offered, some, I guess, just organization aspects behind creating a class. So we just, we both, built off of what we knew, and it's been a really great partnership since then. So prior to COVID, we were having classes with 25, 30 people, students in one class, and that was super fun. And then, all that came to an end because our event space had to shut down. So, instead of throwing in the towel, we started innovating, and we ended up teaching some classes at one of my properties in Castle Rock, which is, 40 minutes south of Denver. And we started getting people that would come, and we're like, wow, this means a lot. If during this pandemic, safely, of course, we were having people driving from all over. And then one day we got this gentleman that came in from Utah and this girl that came in from Texas. And we're like, wow, this is so cool that people are so dedicated to learn about mushrooms that they're coming from all over. So then recently, Zach, he bought a new house. So he dedicated literally this section of his house, and we turned it into a classroom. And that's what we've been doing since then. And we might even be, outgrowing that soon. We're looking at, some other properties that might be able to be more classroom friendly, but it's been such a wonderful experience meeting all these different people. Recently someone from England flew all the way over to take our class, and, that meant so much to us. And this guy is so cool. He was super hyped up, and it seems like once or twice a month, whenever we're giving these classes, it gives me like a boost of energy just to be around these people and teach about mushrooms. And we learn just as much as we teach. So it's just like this symbiotic relationship with the mushroom community, and just, having Zach there to, bounce ideas off each other. And it's been, a really wonderful relationship. And I foresee, we started doing some online classes, which is more just like Zoom meetings, and it goes off on like all these crazy rabbit holes. But maybe one day we'll do some kind of a online, more structured class. But for now, it's just like getting thrust into the moment and learning, and teaching all these different types of people. And I feel like it's brought a lot of value to me. I know Zach would probably say the same. And for the people that are leaving our classes, they get like this huge bag of ready to fruit mushrooms, and then they get a whole stack of petri dishes and a whole kit, and like they're leaving the class with everything that they need to grow mushrooms. And then 2 weeks later, we get all these pictures of people growing mushrooms, and it's very satisfying. It's a lot of fun.
That seems like one of your hallmarks is hooking people up with petri dishes. Because I saw on the Fresh from the Farm Fungi Etsy, there were a couple reviews saying, "Thanks for the extra petri dishes." And here's
yeah.
So I love that.
Yeah, that's one of when I'm bored, I'm just pouring plates. It's one of my my downtime activities, but I don't mind doing it because that's that was my background. Is I could pour 500 plates and I used to do it a lot. And now I can carry that to a whole nother community besides, like, when I used to work in the hospitals and the labs, and, that's its own world. And I'm bringing that to the rest of the world. So
Sure.
that's how I look at it.
Well, and let's dive into that for a little bit. I was going to ask you about your background because I saw that you were grinding away in the corporate world for a number of years and working extensively in laboratory settings. And then I'd like to know, what exactly were you doing before striking out on your own as a mycopreneur? And when did you make that transition into leaving the corporatocracy and pursuing Fresh from the Farm Fungi as your full-time hustle?
Yeah. So I'll take it way back to college. I got my degree at University of Buffalo as a medical technologist. So I used to work in clinical labs and hospitals, and I got to see a microbiology lab. I got to see a blood bank, where I worked at a blood bank for a couple years while I was in college. So I understood, the grind and the flow, the workflow. And then right when I graduated college, my wife and I, she was my girlfriend at the time, we took a road trip with a friend all the way across the country. And, we explored everything in a little Jeep Wrangler, and we camped out, and we got to see the whole country. And that opened up my eyes to, a lot of opportunity. So we fell in love with Colorado. So my wife, she works for Geico, and she got really lucky and was able to transfer here to Denver. So, that was the footing to get us away from where I grew up, which is Buffalo, New York. And then in that process, I found this company called Allosource in Centennial, and they procure stem cells, and, they produce all of these products for surgery using donated tissue from people that, donate their organs. So it's a tissue bank, and I worked there for a couple years. So that was a totally different experience. And I learned all about aseptic technique. We had to wear like the full space suits, and, it was very rigorous and sterile procedures. The whole entire facility was HEPA filters and positive pressure. And, we would test the air quality for one particle, like very high standards. So I did that for a little while. And my supervisor from that job moved out to California. So, the culture kind of changed a little, and I decided to move out of that industry. And at that same time, that's when cannabis was legalized here in Denver. So I saw that opportunity. So I worked at one of the larger cultivators here in Denver. And I was probably number 12 employee, and now they're like 400 employees deep. But basically my role was to do this really innovative process where we were tissue culturing plants for production. So at that time I started gathering, different lab equipment, and I just was always just like really enthusiastic about laboratory and plant tissue culture. And I'm a big gardener. So naturally mushrooms kind of work their way in, and plant tissue culture is very similar to mushroom, all the Petri plates and stuff like that. So I tried doing some button mushrooms at that time, just in my backyard as part of my garden. And, it was a horrible failure, but I'm also, one that doesn't like to fail. So I just doubled down, and, I bought a bunch of mushroom cultures and started growing them. And so that was probably 5 or 6 years ago now. So then once my job was over with that plant cannabis producer, we bred over 85 different strains and kind of worked through their genetics. So they, sadly let me go at the end of that project. And I could have stayed on to be like a cultivator, but I wanted to move on to bigger and better things. So I ended up joining forces with a lab testing facility. So I was a supervisor at one of the laboratories that we tested cannabis products for contaminants, and then yeast and mold, Salmonella E. coli, just to protect the consumer. So we were like, the gatekeepers basically. Before it got to the shelf, it had to pass our quality control. And then we worked hand in hand with the CDPHE, which is the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. So they were the overseers, and basically we just tested all this product before it hit the shelf. So I did that for a couple of years as well. And, during that time, I was super grateful because it was another really young company it was a startup company. So I got to see, that company grow. So I got two really unique experiences where I was really early on and watched the company grow. And then it finally hit a ceiling where, I couldn't do any more work for them. So at that point, I decided to do my own thing. So, a couple months prior, I was growing some mushrooms, and I remember I grew some lion's mane mushrooms, and we had so much that my wife and I were like, all right, well, we can't finish all this mushroom. So I just posted an ad on Craigslist, and I was like, lion's mane mushroom, fresh, come pick it up. And I remember this guy, he rode his bike from North Lakewood, which is probably 20 minutes away. And he showed up at my house, and he just grabbed the mushroom and ate it like an apple. And I was like, oh my God, like, don't do that. You're supposed to cook it. But at that moment, I realized like, wow, there's like a market for this. I love growing mushrooms. I'm just going to make this happen. So I started off in like this tiny little 4x4 tent, and slowly and surely I was just selling mushrooms to my friends and family for a while. And then Christina, the owner at the co-op, she reached out to me. Maybe she saw that Craigslist ad as well. And they were starting this little grocery store, and they wanted my mushrooms there. So that's what happened. And then, probably a year later, I joined the Cherry Creek Farmers Market, and that's kind of when things really started taking off because I couldn't grow enough mushrooms. They were getting so popular. So that's kind of like how I weaseled my way into the situation. And I just got a lot of really lucky opportunities. And then slowly I knew that if I started my own business, like the ceiling would be endless, I guess. So the opportunity to keep growing is always there. And that's kind of my passion, is like innovation and just continuous growth. And that's kind of the story of how it all happened. Yeah.
That's super exciting and inspiring. And I feel like you're just getting started now that you're, moving full momentum ahead and firing on all cylinders. There's an infinite amount of different applications. If you were to start directing your attention, you're pretty focused on what you're doing, but there's a lot of room for innovation. And to draw it back to you saying that you got lucky, I had a good fortune a couple of years ago to work with the songwriter Kenny Loggins, Danger Zone, all that fun stuff. He had a quote that he told me, which I really liked, which is that luck smells like sweat. And I always took that with me in my entrepreneurial journey, that like, yeah, you can get lucky, but you have to grind and you have to put yourself in those positions, and then the luck starts to come. So it sounds like you did a lot to put yourself in a favorable position. But yes, luck is a big part of it too, obviously. So I'm curious if there are any other projects on the horizon for you in your business that you can share with us.
So like I said before, with the outdoor project with the porcini, I'm really looking forward to that. Kind of like my super long-term vision with that is, coupling my experience with the tissue culture with the wild mushrooms. And I think that there could be some kind of marriage there where, my ultimate long-term dream is to like buy this plot of land and terraform it with perfectly cultivated plant tissue cultures with mushroom mycelium. And that's my super long-term dream. There's going to be a lot of steps along the way. And as far as this year, we're going to be at Cherry Creek Farmers Market again. We're going to have some more cordyceps, hopefully. And then we're just going to keep keep keeping our customers happy. You know, a majority of our customers are just repeat people that really love mushrooms. And that means the most to me is like, you know, when I hand off that box of mushrooms and that person keeps coming back week after week, it just makes me feel, you know, satisfied and like I'm doing something good. So, yep.
Well, I hope you have a few more customers after this podcast, myself being one of them. I'm looking forward to the class on April 10th. I believe you guys
Yep.
are running a online class, which I'll be able to attend.
Yep.
And I want to wrap up in a second, but before we do, I'd like to know if you have any guiding philosophy or wisdom to your cultivation practice or business ethos in general you'd like to share. And why I mention this is because I've heard recently about some people in the mycology industry and cultivators who are not thrilled with the way that cannabis went and turning into this like monolithic mega brands, you know, that are trying to get the most THC possible and scale up. And, you know, there's all kinds of crazy and questionably ethically questionable experiments that are going on. So I think it is really important that we have conversations about like a guiding ethos for people who are doing this. One of mine is cooperation over competition. I believe in abundance mentality. I believe like you're sharing extra cultures with people in petri dishes. And I love that sense that I've personally experienced knowing mushroom cultivators and being a part of the San Diego Mycological Society. Like there's a place for everyone. This is not about hoarding proprietary information. It's about sharing and doing good and creating a world of abundance and of equitable access to food and to opportunities for people. So I'm curious if you have any comments you'd like to make, maybe a guiding ethos about your business or your cultivation practice.
Yeah. So looking back on the cannabis industry here in Denver, I think one of the main failures in that realm is that there was this dissonance between the business owners and the consumer. So I kind of witnessed being on all three sides and being a part of, you know, the regulatory side of things. And what ended up happening is that, you know, the rules were set in place and there was this constant battle between the regulators and the producers. And eventually, you know, these producers got super big, like what you described. And instead of, you know, having the best interest of the, you know, the consumer in mind, they would kind of bend these rules in favor of the cultivator. Now, that being said, we're 5 or 6 years later and all the dust has settled. But early on, I think that if there was more public input in all of these like regulations, for instance, the amount of pesticides that could be in some of these products, you know, at first it was pretty high and then slowly now it's almost nothing, which is great. But that being said, you know, we've gone that path with cannabis. It's, you know, a medicine, it's a plant medicine, but it should be as we move forward with the mushroom industry, especially, I think that having the consumer first when, you know, when you're creating these regulations, I've given talks on this before. So for example, mycotoxins, which are this really inert compound, it's almost invisible, but in the process of growing mushrooms, there's a pretty high risk for these mycotoxins to make it into the fruiting bodies. And I believe that the highest standards have to be set in place, especially, you know, psilocybin is on the forefront. And right now in Colorado, it's decriminalized in Denver, which means that people can cultivate it. It's the lowest priority for police officers. You can take it, you know, you can't sell it. So, you know, it is what it is. But I think that there has to be that regulator in the middle between the producer and the consumer so that the consumer will know, all right, I'm getting a safe product. This doesn't have mycotoxins. This doesn't have Salmonella E. coli. And if that means, you know, going medical first, or I don't know if it will ever be a recreational product. It's very serious and, you know, it's a very personal experience. So I think that the importance of a regulator between the consumer and the producer is so much more important with mushrooms because of, safety aspects. So that's what I'm promoting. I think that the cannabis industry failed early, but over the course of the past few years, it's getting more, it's becoming safer for the consumer. The prices are coming down. It just took too long, in my opinion. And I think that if we're looking forward, we can do a much better job at protecting people who are taking these products and making sure they're safe, they don't have contamination, and they're being produced, in a clean way too. Like that's another reason why we can come back for full circle to the hemp industry. Hemp is different from cannabis. It's a textile as well. So there's so much waste product that it shouldn't be thrown out. It should be utilized. And that's where mushrooms come in. So it's all going to come together at some point. It's just a matter of time.
Super awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording, but maybe we'll do a little outro and then we can unpack after this a little bit. But it's been a privilege. It's been a privilege to talk shop with you, Gary. Thanks so much for coming on the Mycopreneur podcast. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me and on such short notice. And, it was a pleasure meeting you for the first time too. Like that's super cool. And, I really enjoyed this talk and I hope that, it gets the word out there and, there's got to be more of this. It's just bound to happen.
Awesome. Okay, man. Well, take care, buddy. We'll make this an ongoing relationship. Doesn't need to be a one and done kind of thing, man. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Really excited about what you're doing and look forward to ongoing developments.
Cool. Thank you.